Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. My name is Jo Shaw, and I'm the Dean of Research and the Deputy Head of the College of Humanities and Social Science. I imagine one or two people will still be making their way in because this isn't the easiest place to get into, but I'm delighted to see such a good turnout for the inaugural lecture of Catharine Ward Thompson, who's a chair of landscape architecture. And it's actually, I think, 13 years since Catharine first took up her chair, so it's well worn. And very comfortable, and she seats in it very, very well. But as many of you know, of course, Edinburgh College of Art and the University of Edinburgh merged in 2011, and as a result of that, Catharine takes up a chair within the University of Edinburgh, and we have a very strong and positive tradition within the College of Humanities and Social Science of holding inaugural lectures. They're very important times to mark people's work and their distinction. Now, Catharine certainly is extraordinarily distinguished. She's got a range of degrees culminating with a PhD in landscape architecture from the University of Edinburgh, and she's a fellow of the Chartered Landscape Institute and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. But in a way, Catharine, through her various academic roles, has epitomized the toing and froing, the links between the Edinburgh institutions, which are incredibly important to us. She's been in the Edinburgh College of Art. She first joined the Edinburgh College of Art's Department of Architecture as a lecturer in 1981, and then she's held a number of positions, including being from 1989 onwards the head of the School of Landscape Architecture and being the first woman to hold the position of head of school or head of department within the college's history, and that's one of her distinctions. She held a chair at Heriot-Watt University from 1999 onwards, then in 2000 she was appointed the Director of Research at the Faculty of Environmental Studies at Edinburgh College of Art and Heriot-Watt together, and then in 2002 became a Research Professor of Landscape Architecture for the college. And she was, as many of you here will know, also an honorary professor at the University of Edinburgh's then School of Arts, Culture and Environment from 2007 to 2010. And then in 2011, of course, with the merging of Edinburgh College of Art and the University of Edinburgh and the forming of the larger merged Edinburgh College of Art, taken up a chair within the University of Edinburgh. Now, Catharine epitomizes an extraordinary grasp of interdisciplinarity. Her background was in environmental botany and geography before she turned her hand to landscape architecture. And she works across many disciplines and brings together groups within the University of Edinburgh and outside, and engages research funding from a number of different research councils, public bodies and other bodies, which makes her work on outdoor environments genuine interdisciplinary effort. I think we're incredibly proud of Catharine for that. She focuses on inclusive access to outdoor environments, environment, behavior, interactions, historic landscapes, and contemporary research needs, and salutogenic environments. I'm afraid I don't know what salutogenic environments are, but perhaps Catharine will tell us during the course of today's lecture. Now, Catharine's been director of an important research centre from 2001 onwards, which she originally obtained a £500,000 grant from the Scottish Funding Council, and it's now in its 11th year, and it goes from strength to strength. And Catharine has already, just 2 weeks ago, applied to the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council for yet another large interdisciplinary grant to build on the work of Open Space and her various projects, including EDIGO, Inclusive Design for Getting Outdoors, which is a research consortium. So Catharine has funding from so many different places, it would be impossible to list these. So I'm going to step down now and invite Catharine to come forward and give her inaugural lecture, which is on the topic of you really should get out more. That's a good message to many of us academics. Landscape quality and quality of life. Thank you very much. Please welcome Catharine Ward Thompson.
Thank you, Jo. Can you all hear me up at the back, down in the front? Yes, good. It's Thank you for that nice introduction. It is a real privilege to be here and a delight to have so many friends and colleagues from different parts of my life and work here tonight. And although most of my lecture will describe recent and current research that I'm involved in, I want to start by taking a slightly wider perspective. And I want to recognise that this is an important moment in some ways for landscape architecture in Edinburgh, and in particular for the University of Edinburgh. Many of you will recognise Patrick Geddes' valley section here and his description of the valley section and its manifestation in the town, the city of Edinburgh. Patrick Geddes was calling himself a landscape architect in 1904 from his base in Outlook Tower in the Lawn Market, and he was involved in designing Edinburgh Zoo, which gives you a wonderful view of the Pentland Hills and the basis for that illustration of the valley section. But it wasn't until the late 1950s that landscape architecture was taught either at the university or at Edinburgh College of Art. And we have a rather wonderful quote for landscape architecture, or series of quotes. Robert H. Matthew, a graduate of Edinburgh College of Art and the University of Edinburgh's first professor of architecture, said at that time, referring to the late 1950s, and he was talking about Frank Mears here as the holder of the solitary light. Frank Mears married Patrick Geddes' daughter, Nora Geddes, who was also trained in landscape design. At that time, in spite of the almost solitary light held by Frank Mears, a blanket of darkness had dropped over the city of Patrick Geddes. The Outlook Tower stood on Castle Hill, a curiosity unregarded either by town or gown. But together with the head of urban design and regional planning, Percy Johnson Marshall, Frank Clark was persuaded to join the department and to set up the vital but elusive field of landscape, hitherto a rare element in the architectural connection, now thought of to the annoyance or perhaps amusement of some scientists in environmental terms. Well, let's hope we're keeping them amused. Frank Clark, of course, was a pioneer of modernist landscape design. He was the chief landscape architect for the 1951 Festival of Britain, and he initiated the postgraduate diploma in landscape architecture at the University of Edinburgh in 1962 and taught there along with Laurie Fricker until Clark's death in 1971. It was the first course in landscape architecture in Scotland, one of the first in the UK. And I started my studies here, sadly, just after Frank Clark died in 1972. Vintage years, one or two vintage people in the audience too. Meanwhile, at Edinburgh College of Art, under architecture head of school Ralph Cowan, David Skinner began teaching landscape architecture in the 1960s. David had trained under Ian McHarg, that other pioneer of landscape architecture from Scotland and author of the seminal book Design with Nature. But he had gone to the University of Pennsylvania in the States to set up his course, a Masters of Landscape Architecture. And it was there that David Skinner had studied. So at Edinburgh College of Art, under David Skinner, landscape architecture was originally taught as a course for architecture students in their senior years, but it developed into a fully fledged course in its own right. And in 1974, David Skinner, assisted by Colin McKercher, established the first undergraduate course in landscape architecture. And in 1986, the School of Landscape Architecture was established in its own right at the College of Art. David Skinner led it. He became Professor Skinner until shortly before his untimely death in 1989, sadly, just after I'd been appointed head of school there. Now, it's here that the history of landscape architecture education in Scotland gets even more complicated. In 1995, the MLA, what was originally the diploma course that Frank Clark had initiated at the University of Edinburgh, was transferred to Edinburgh College of Art. And for 15 years, landscape architecture education in Scotland, undergraduate, taught, and research postgraduate level, was focused solely in Edinburgh College of Art until the merger with the university in 2011. When landscape architecture now as part of ISALA, Edinburgh School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture, has come home again to the university. So here we are, back where we started. And it's very nice to have that sense of closure. I have the enormous privilege of being the first professor of landscape architecture at the University of Edinburgh. And although, as Joe says, I've been a professor for 13 years, this is my first inaugural lecture, so I'm very grateful for that. Although in true academic style, I was finishing it right up until the last minute, but that's academia for you. I'm also delighted that some of the important people in the latter part of that history I've just described are here tonight. Dr. John Byram, who along with Dr. James Hope was one of the first 4 students in landscape architecture at the university, starting exactly 50 years ago this autumn. He taught me, as did Seamus Filer, also here, and Peter Daniel taught part-time at both the university and Edinburgh College of Art on different occasions. We studied in 16 to 18 George Square, the north side of George Square, sadly now demolished, but in one of the townhouses there. And I should also mention other important people in landscape architecture. I worked for a number of years with the office of Bill Cairns, W.J. Cairns and Partners, at which many landscape architects who've worked in Scotland and internationally have worked. And I was particularly fortunate to work with Mark Turnbull, another of Ian McHarg's graduates, for several years in my early days in practice. So I wanted just to set that scene for education and professional development in landscape architecture before turning now to talk about some of my relatively recent research and the evidence it offers in support of good landscape planning and design. And I should also say here that I think much of my research has not been dedicated to improving the practice of landscape architecture in detail, so much as improving an understanding of the need for good landscape architecture among other people, among policymakers and planners who are ultimately likely to commission the work of the profession. My research looks outward to the wider world and I hope presents, among other things, the case for the value of our profession. So what kind of environments are good for us? We all know that an active lifestyle is a healthy one and that getting away from the stresses and strains of everyday life can be good for us. But do we live in the kinds of environments that make this easy? To return to Patrick Geddes briefly, back in the early years of the 20th century when Geddes was working with Frank Mears on the design of Edinburgh Zoo, he was promoting the importance of embodied experience of the landscape as a way of learning. Vivendo discimus, by living we learn. And he particularly promoted the importance of children's experience of playing in the landscape, building things, cultivating plants, caring for animals as a vital part of their development. And as part of my own very early research, I was keen on understanding children's perceptions and the importance of playground design. You see Patrick Geddes' quote here. This was the primary school playground my children were presented with. Things hadn't changed very much in a long time. And it's very important that we continue to work on providing quality environments for our children if we really do care about them, as we claim we do. And a small amount of my early research was focused on understanding working with children, 9 to 10-year-olds in primary schools, to elicit a better understanding of what they wanted in their playgrounds and what might support their development and their sense of enjoyment, as well as learning about nature. And just one little example in this slide here, we worked with projective methods to understand what was sort of core, what was at the heart of what children wanted to see in their playgrounds. And a number of elements to do with the natural environment, with engaging with wildlife, with nature, with growing things came out as absolutely central to what children wanted in their playgrounds. And there are organisations, Grants for Learning in Scotland certainly does work to try and promote this more, but we do sadly still have some pretty scary playgrounds around, so more work needed. Now in that work, that was early research undertaken in collaboration with Peter Aspinall, with whom I'm delighted still to be working. It's important to mention him because he's been a mentor and collaborator to so many researchers, and it's a privilege to have him as a co-director of Open Space Research Centre that I direct, along with Simon Bell and our administrator, Anna Orme. And I should also mention I'm very fortunate to have a number of other very clever, very dedicated researchers that I've worked with on a range of exciting projects. I can't mention them all by name, but there's a fantastic group of people that I've been privileged to work with. Some of our work, as we developed open space, focused on inclusive access to outdoor environments, was for the Forestry Commission. And building on our interest, and my interest in particular, in children's landscapes, we started to be interested in what were some of the common themes that were coming out in research we were doing for not only Forestry Commission in Scotland, but also English Nature as it was then, looking at the social benefits of access to the natural environment and green open space in particular for a range of communities and user groups. And one of the things that struck us when we started to ask people to tell us what was important to them in getting out, getting outdoors, engaging with different kinds of outdoor environments, is how vivid the memories of childhood experience were. It's lovely that teenagers are nostalgic already when they're talking about their childhood. Hardly any fish there now. But I love, always in Greefield when I was wee lassie, and I also love the wildness of the Water of Leith in Corstorphine. Really wild place. And also this delightful evocation of how the next generation can then enjoy rediscovering that engagement with the natural environment with their children or grandchildren, and making a music tree in the woodland. This is rich multisensory experience that is possible in these kind of environments. And this qualitative research really underlined the importance for everyone of access to these kinds of environments as part of healthy development in early age. Being researchers, we did a bit of geeky stuff too. So we ran some logistic regressions on some quantitative data we'd collected via questionnaires. And one of the things we were interested in is what predicts how often people as adults from different communities across Scotland and the English Midlands, what predicts how often they go to green spaces as adults? And every way we sliced the data, what kept coming to the top as either the only or one of the only predictors was, perhaps not surprisingly, how often people had gone there as children. And in particular, people who did not visit these kind of places regularly as children were very unlikely to visit them frequently at all as adults. And being a good researcher, I have to tell you that there were some other factors that were significant as well. But this childhood factor turned out to be really important. And I suppose the fact that people didn't visit often as adults, if they hadn't as children, suggests that there's something really important that we need to pay attention to if we're trying to encourage active outdoor use in adults today. We were so interested in this that we wanted to see what else was associated with going frequently to woods or green spaces as adults. And we found that there were a number of perceptions, we learned this through questionnaire responses, that showed positive results if people had been at least weekly, several times a week, or at least once a week as children to green or natural spaces as children, and were negative in their response if it was less frequent as children. And this included feeling comfortable walking on one's own, particularly in woodlands, whether you would visit a space within walking distance of home, whether you would feel more energetic when you go into a green space. So this has implications for physical activity. If you went often as a child, you feel energetic. If you didn't, you don't associate green space with feeling energetic. And even the sort of spiritual or transcendental qualities of open space are perceived differently among adults who went often as children than those who didn't. So why does this matter so much? I think it's becoming obvious. This childhood experience is not only important for children. It's important because it's good fun, but it's also developmentally important. And it allows children to develop capacities that will stand them in good stead throughout the rest of their lives. And that seems to be the really crucial issue. If we know, and it is a fact, that people of any age are more active when they're outdoors than indoors, and we want to encourage people to lead healthy, active lifestyles, are we wasting our time if there hasn't been adequate attention to how children access these kinds of spaces earlier on? A real challenge here. Now, what about teenagers? We can't live without them, but sometimes we find it very hard to live with them. Teenagers and outdoor space, another whole challenge. We've done some work with this too. We know that teenagers in public space can be a challenge for other groups, and I'll mention that a bit more in a minute. Some work we did a few years ago for Natural England, published in 2010, but actually done a few years earlier, looked at teenagers and young people's access to outdoor and natural environments. And we also undertook some focus groups with teenagers living in some of the most deprived urban communities in England. And they all expressed a desire for outdoor spaces where they could legitimately be, where they could hang out, where no one would tell them to go away, where they could learn the social skills of adult life, where they could see and be seen, where they could watch the action. They could find out how they fit in that greater world. They want places in public, but they also want places where they can be themselves. They want places to challenge them, places where they can mess about, where they can test the boundaries. Probably many of us, if not all of us, have tested the boundaries in our teenage years in one way or another. And it's a legitimate thing to do. It's probably part of healthy growing up. But are there places, particularly for young people living in deprived urban circumstances, where they can do it today? Where you find out about the tensile strength of wood because by jumping on a branch till it breaks. That's a very good way to understand the tensile strength of wood, but it's vandalism in an urban environment often. So are we offering places where young people can get these opportunities, develop new skills, but also feel a sense of empowerment, feel that they can do what they want to do? It also seems that teenagers who've had some experience of the natural environment when they're younger felt able to cope with such places as resources to retreat to in difficult times in their lives. If they felt depressed or lonely or upset, these young people could use a resource, the outdoor environment, a place to go away, a place that meant something to them from earlier in childhood, in a way that it seemed wasn't the case for those who really didn't have this richer childhood experience. So one of the challenges for society today, I think, is to learn how to accommodate gangs of idle youths roaming through the landscape and actually to accord them a place to allow them spaces where they can be in public, as well as places where they can do their own thing, test their skills, learn about life, be energetic, and we can accept them and privilege that experience too. And this experience goes on into adulthood, as you will have gathered by now, one of the themes of this talk. Some quotes from some work we did for Forestry Commission, working in central Scotland, looking at different communities and how they used woods in and around towns. And these quotes just underline the importance of the natural environment as a resource for helping us cope with life. If you're unemployed or if you're at a difficult stage in your life, you can go somewhere, let off steam, get it out of your system. You don't have to be in consumption mode. You don't have to have the price of the cup of coffee in Starbucks or whatever to do this. You can just get away from it all. Very important. So, sustainability, health and environment. In recent years, there has been a recognition that, yes, landscape architecture may have something to offer these wider realms and political spheres. The World Health Organization has underlined how a sustainable development is not only green, but it also has to support health equity. It needs to be supportive of health of present and future generations and different people in different parts of society. And it's taken a while for environmental health to focus not just on environmental hazards, and there are still many environmental hazards we certainly should focus on, but also to look at salutogenic environments, ones that engender good health, Joe. And that's been a really important and comparatively new phenomenon, although I'll remind you in a minute that there is nothing new in this world. And the Marmot report in England in 2010 mentions green spaces several times and underlines the importance of environmental justice, of addressing socio-spatial inequalities. We shouldn't suffer just because of where we happen to live in terms of inequitable access to resources that can help us lead healthy lives. So is there equity of access to green space? Well, actually, no. We've done some recent research with Harriet Watt colleagues looking in England in this case for cave space when it still existed, at deprived urban communities in England. The first report, this was developed by our Glenn Bramley and colleagues at Harriet Watt, showed in general that the quantity and quality of green space, public green space, is worse for people in deprived urban areas, that black and minority ethnic communities who mostly live in deprived urban areas have poor quality open space. Not surprisingly, high quality open space is also more likely to be used, and poorer communities are less physically active and have poorer health. So we've got some clear inequities there, and this was epidemiological looking across England. In open space, we did some studies to support this, trying to drill down a bit deeper, and we think we are the first people to look at particular different minority ethnic communities' experience of green space and their perceptions of it, their use of it, and how they see it might help them in their health. We looked at the London area, West Midlands, and the Liverpool, Manchester area, at communities there as part of this research. And I'm just giving you the sort of headline findings here, but a range of different minority ethnic groups perceived that there was something really important to be offered from good quality local open space, even if they didn't have access to that at the moment. They saw it as particularly important for their physical health, but also nearly half of them saw it as important for their mental health and for social health, for developing good relationships between family and friends. So what's new? Those of you who are landscape historians will know about the lungs of the city, about the development of urban parks and that history, starting in the 19th century. Victoria Park in London, seen as an important way of enhancing people's health. And these quotes just confirm that actually what we are rediscovering is something in policy terms that was being promoted 150, 200 years ago and has sort of slipped by the wayside. There's a whole public health history that goes in there as well that George Morris is better than I at describing. But nonetheless, we are, in one sense, simply coming back to a place we were before and recognizing the importance of engagement with the natural environment as part of a healthy one. The details may be different, but actually not that different. Here's Birkenhead Park, developed by Joseph Paxton in 1843, one of the first publicly funded parks. The parks movement in North America, many of you will know. Olmsted and Vaux's plan for Central Park, again seen as vital to the development of New York City, the antithesis to the confined spaces of the town. And when you see some of these quotes, it's very interesting. They resonate with much recent research. The artificial conditions of the town would produce a harmful effect, first on a man's entire mental and nervous system, and ultimately on his entire constitutional organization. Overexposure to the artificial sites of the city would lead to excessive nervous tension, over-anxiety, hasteful disposition, impatience, and irritability. Sounds like many academic contexts today, doesn't it? The antidote is pleasing rural scenery. Now, what's interesting about this is that actually it not only resonates with what we think in the 21st century in some ways about the benefits of green space, but it also harks back to some of the picturesque language of the end of the 18th century. Uvedale Price talking about picturesque landscapes, learning from nature to make beauty more amusing, varied, and playful. The picturesque excites the active curiosity, which gives play to the mind. Well, Olmsted's ideas, which I became very interested in as a way of trying to understand what lies behind these relationships between access to green space, natural environments, and health, Olmsted's ideas and the picturesque very much resonate with work done, some seminal work done by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan in the States on restorative environments. And they've developed attention restoration theory, a model that suggests that the natural environment is particularly good at helping us restore our attention after it's been depleted, the kind of directed attention that we use when we're hunched over our computers all day. That can become depleted, and it seems the natural environment is particularly good at restoring our attention. And it has a number of qualities: being away, extent, fascination, compatibility with the need of the moment, that can help restore our sense of well-being and buffer us against future stress. But this soft fascination in particular seems to be very much in the same kind of line of thinking as those quotes from Uvedale Price about the picturesque, active curiosity which gives play to the mind, and Olmsted's ideas. This idea of an environment which engages us without us having to take too much effort, which is interesting, which offers the possibilities of interest in the future, into the distance, but doesn't require us to really concentrate in a way that is stressful. So these 18th and 19th century ideas are remarkably prescient of 20th and even 21st century explanations. And this brings me to some of the recent research I'm involved in that is interested in the potential mechanisms linking landscape and health, and the candidates for why it seems that there really is, in epidemiological terms, in many contexts, a link between what kind of access you have to green and natural environments and how healthy you are. The attention restoration model I've mentioned already, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan, that's one theory, a psychological response that buffers our ability to handle stress and directed attention. There's also a psychoevolutionary model, which I'll come back to, which suggests that actually hardwired into our system are some biological responses that don't require us to consciously relate to the green or natural environment, but subconsciously make a difference to us. Another mechanism that's been suggested, and of course these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, is physical activity. When we're outdoors, we are almost all of us more active than indoors. Walking is by far the most popular activity outdoors, and particularly in a natural environment. And walking obviously is good for us in terms of physical activity, but we know also that physical activity has a beneficial effect on our mental health and on stress. Social contact. We're much more likely to come in contact with other people outside our family when we're outside than when we're in our own homes. And we know that social isolation can be very challenging for some people, particularly older people living on their own. But that sort of informal social contact that happens between neighbours can usually only happen if you're out of your house, if you're out and about. So it's possible that that social contact is actually what's good for us, what's beneficial to us. So some of what I've been doing in research recently has been trying to look for evidence of one or more of these mechanisms. We're working with different groups of people. And one group of people we've been working on through IDGO, Inclusive Design for Getting Outdoors is the name of the project, but it's easier to remember just thinking, I'd go outdoors if I could, wouldn't you? Getting outdoors in old age. We've been working with people aged 65 plus and producing some good, solid empirical evidence to support the fact that if you live in an environment that makes it easy and enjoyable to get outdoors, you're more likely to be physically active, even into old age, healthier and more satisfied with life. And we have taken into account socioeconomic status and all the other things that might confound those findings, and these are findings that are significant above and beyond that. We've looked at what predicts different levels of walking in older people. These are participants across different parts of Britain, mainland Britain, and we've looked at what encourages people in recreational walking or walking for transport. Two different kinds of walking, not surprisingly, different kinds of environments support one or the other. So we know that, perhaps not surprisingly, a pleasant open space supports people in walking for recreation. One that's attractive, that has a variety of vegetation, but also has social contact opportunities. Very important. And we also know that a lack of the negative things makes a difference too. A lack of vandalism, dog mess, the world divides into the people who are keen on walking dogs because that's one of the best ways of keeping physically active, and the people who are put off going in places where there's dog mess. So that's a real challenge. And the other real challenge is that older people tell us that young people hanging around is what puts them off going into outdoor spaces. So we have got some challenges in our society here. But one of the things we need to think about in design terms is how we can make places where older people can feel comfortable walking, going into natural environments, going into public space without a fear that as our peripheral vision goes, as our hearing goes, that someone whizzing up from behind on a scooter or blades or something doesn't catch us, make us fall off balance, not because that person is necessarily behaving in an antisocial way particularly, but because that juxtaposition of someone young and energetic and fast on the same path as someone who maybe feels a little bit more frail on their feet cannot necessarily make both feel comfortable. So some challenges there. Walking for transport, the quality of the paths to local open spaces makes a difference. So a path that's easy but also enjoyable. Even into old age, we want to not just go out because we have to go out, drag ourselves to the shops if we can, but we actually want to have a good time while we're going there. And we're much more likely to walk if it's a pleasant walk on the way there than if it's not. And things that, if you work in research on older people, get underlined again and again and again. The importance of public toilets, the importance of good public transport, but also the importance of seats to rest on. Not only at destinations, but on the way to those destinations. And we really do face some societal challenges if we can't get this right, because often you talk to people in local authorities who say, well, if you put a bench there, then teenagers are just going to sit on it or something. Can't possibly put a bench in. Well, it doesn't seem to me such a bad thing if teenagers sit on benches occasionally, but we do need to find a way in our public environments of creating places where people can stop and have a rest on the way to the destinations they want to go to, as well as at them. Does how near the green space or public space to your home is make a difference? Yes, it does. If you live within 10 minutes walk of a local open space, our participants, 65 plus, were twice as likely to achieve healthy levels of walking if their local open space was 10 minutes or closer to where they lived, and that's walking distance, than if they were further away. And similarly, they were more than twice as likely to be satisfied with life if they had that green space nearby. And this underlines evidence from a lot of different sources that to make a difference to our lives, these local open spaces really need to be very close. For children, for older people particularly, but actually for us all. If it's not within 5 or 10 minutes of where we live, we're probably not going to go there very often. So it has to be really close by and accessible, of course. Another project, an extension of our research with older people, looked at DIY streets, do-it-yourself streets and shared spaces. We worked with Sustrans on projects where local residential streets were improved, or working with the local community to try and make them more friendly for uses other than vehicles whizzing up and down the street. So this was quite a challenge. An environmental intervention, I'd go to, this was the second phase, I'd go and I'd go to. I'd go outdoors if I could, wouldn't you? Yes, I'd go too. So what we were looking at here was the implementation of these shared space streets or home zone. Many of you will know the home zone concept. These weren't quite home zones in all cases, but more a more modest version of that in residential streets. And we wanted to see whether interventions in these streets meant that people went outside more often, spent more time outside in the local environment, whether they would have a better social network and a better quality of life. This was a real challenge. We were looking at comparator communities that didn't have these interventions to see if the interventions made a difference. If anyone is interested in natural experiments and longitudinal designs, I can show you the scars afterwards. Very difficult to achieve in practice. Some of the residents in the streets where there were interventions, these were in England and Wales, one in Scotland, but mostly in England and Wales, felt they had become more active Interestingly, they also thought their streets were easier to walk in after dark and safer. No change to the lighting in these streets. So this was a social perception that had changed people's feeling of confidence about going out in dark. Nothing to do with the lighting. But overall, we asked people to wear accelerometers and keep diaries for a week. So we've got some objective measures of activity and some subjective ones. And the key message is, not surprisingly perhaps, it doesn't matter what you do when you go outdoors. Getting out of the house means you are likely to be more active. And that's true when you're over 65 as well. And for our older participants, whether they went out of the house and got into a car and went somewhere, or whether they went to the bus stop and got a bus, whether they went out and went dancing. Actually, they were more active on their way to the dance venue than they were doing the dancing. So it's getting out of the house. That's the key thing. And as you all know, we live in an aging society. We all hope to live into healthy and active old age. We do need to be able to get out and about if we're going to achieve that. One of the other interesting things, given some of the earlier research that I've mentioned, is that these DIY changes didn't appear to have as much of an influence on wider measures of well-being, social engagement and quality of life as other aspects of the environment beyond people's local residential street. And many of the things in our data set that predicted health, well-being, quality of life related to that wider environment, including, yes, the local open space and how attractive and accessible the routes to that open space were. So it really does seem to underline that these local open spaces are making potentially a big difference to quality of life. And most of our participants here were living in very deprived circumstances. They were, with one exception, all the communities were at least in the top 40% and sometimes in the top 15 or even 5% of most deprived communities in England and Wales. So, coming back to the mechanisms. In the final bit of my talk, I just want to come back to some of our very recent research, trying to dig even deeper and look at what are the mechanisms linking landscape and health. I mentioned psychoevolutionary theory earlier. Some of you will be familiar with biophilia theory, the idea that we subconsciously seek contact with nature, and Ulrich's work supporting a psychoevolutionary theory. And there are suggestions that there are psychoneuroendocrine mechanisms within our bodies that respond to the natural environment, whether or not we choose to react consciously, and that make a difference to our quality of life and our health. We know that getting outdoors is actually good for us. I mean, maybe as Scots we don't need to be told this, but we know sunlight is really important for our health. It's important for helping us develop and retain vitamin D. It helps us bone conditions such as osteoporosis or rickets, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, several kinds of cancer, high blood pressure, probably heart disease, are all thought to be diseases contributed to by insufficient vitamin D or insufficient sunlight. So getting outdoors and into that sunlight, as many of us know, is really important. Seasonal affective disorder can also be attributed to lack of sunshine. And these patterns are part of wider health patterns, circadian rhythms, things that in a healthy person helps maintain our balance and our health. In old age, one of the challenges for people who don't get out and about outdoors is often sleep patterns are disrupted because people haven't been out in the sunshine, so circadian rhythms are disrupted. But one of the things that I want to point to here in this slide is the pattern of cortisol here. Just going to get a bit technical here. The important thing to notice is that when we go to sleep, our cortisol is very low, but a healthy cortisol pattern is one that kicks off high early in the morning, within the first 30 minutes of waking up, but then drops very steeply during the day. So it's healthy to have a high cortisol level, but not for long. We want it to kick off high at the start of the day, but then to drop very quickly during the day. And we've done some really groundbreaking research recently for the Scottish Government, looking at the relationship between objectively measured amounts of green space near where people live and their patterns of cortisol over the course of a day. because we wanted to try and get a really robust set of evidence to demonstrate some kind of link between green space and health. We wanted to drill down. And we've got lots of self-report evidence, people telling us what they do, people telling us how they appreciate the natural environment. We thought, can we get something that is an objective measure of green space and an objective measure of stress and show that the two are related? And yes, we have. So remember that slide, remember that pattern of cortisol? So this was with a comparatively small sample, but it was still statistically significant. And so the publication of this research, which is an exploratory phase of the research actually, has attracted a lot of international attention. We can predict whether people live with more or less green space near where they live, according to the slope of their cortisol. And just remember, it's good to have high cortisol level at the start of the day, but it's healthy for it to drop sharply. And so a steeper cortisol slope is healthier. You need to remember this. This was working with people who are not in work, mostly unemployed, but not all available for employment, aged 35 to 55 in very deprived urban communities. And the green space measures were objective measures of the amount of publicly accessible green space around their home. And a second phase of this that we're still writing up at the moment, with a slightly larger sample, has also shown, interestingly, that there are differences between men and women's response. So just to keep you on your toes here, the colours have changed. High green space is blue now, and low green space is red. And you'll see that in men and in women, the low green space pattern of cortisol, 1 hour, that's 3, 6, and 9 hours after waking, is quite similar. But in high green space, in both cases, men and women, the pattern of cortisol is healthier because the slope is steeper, but they are different patterns. In men, this is a more classic stress, where a healthy cortisol slope goes down very sharply, a less healthy cortisol slope, if you have less green space near where you live, it goes down more gently. It's a sort of high, flat slope. Whereas in women, what we're seeing in the low green space is more what's associated with burnout syndrome or long-term stress, where there's not a healthy kickoff of cortisol levels at the start. So it's a low, flat pattern. We're very fortunate in having someone from the University of Westminster working with us who's an expert on cortisol to help us with some of this. I've had a steep learning curve for me in learning about it, but this really is very interesting and exciting finding as part of this research for the Scottish Government, showing that there are biomarkers that we can demonstrate working with people living in their normal everyday environments, going about their normal everyday activities. So this is not putting people in experimental conditions. This is saying, let's look at you where you live, doing what you normally do. And we took cortisol measures over a couple of days, showing there is a relationship between the amount of green space and levels of stress in this population. And some interesting and exciting work we're working on at the moment, to sort of building on some of that understanding of links between stress levels and green space, is working with partners in the Forestry Commission Scotland. We're very fortunate. We've had lots of really great people to work with as funders and partners in our research. And one of the many is Forestry Commission and Forestry Commission Scotland, and Marcus Sangster in particular, ex-Forestry Commission, was an inspiration to us and helped us get to the state where we have this current project, looking at woods in and around towns, which is a project that develops woods for local community use in deprived communities in urban communities in Scotland. It works all over Scotland, but not surprisingly, perhaps it's particularly focused in the Central Belt. And what we're doing, funded by the National Institute for Health Research, Public Health Research Fund. So Public Health funding us now is looking at whether the Woods in and Around Town programme, the physical changes and the social engagement changes, getting people actively involved in those woodlands, makes a difference to their health. And our particular outcome measure here is stress levels. So we've built on that cortisol work. It sounds easy. It's very hard to do in practice. It's another longitudinal natural experiment. But what we want to see if we can do is produce medically robust evidence that community health improvements will follow on from physical changes to the environment, as well as then social engagement with that physically changed environment. And some of our very early research showed the kind of things that we know make a difference. And as I said, we have this new project to start it now, starting to look at this now. Now, some of these changes may seem very familiar to landscape architects, and I'm conscious that some of you sitting in the audience will think, well, as landscape architects, we knew these kind of things were important. We've been doing them all our professional lives. I think the importance of our research, I hope, is to demonstrate to a much wider audience, leaders in public health, in planning and environmental policy, that they should make a much higher priority for publicly accessible, good quality landscape planning and design in our environments as part of equitable, healthy, sustainable communities in the future. And I'm very proud to have contributed to this report for the Scottish Government's Good Places, Better Health study. This was a pioneering study, and I was part of the evaluation group helping look at evidence that had been presented on particular aspects of health and environment. I'll tell you what those words say in a minute, because I know you probably can't read them. Looking at children's places that support children's good health. And their vision coming out of this, which has just recently been promoted, is a Scotland where homes are warm and dry with good quality space for children to play indoors and outdoors, where children play, explore and relax outdoors in streets, parks, green places, open spaces, and have contact with nature in their everyday lives. The presence of children outdoors is welcomed, supported and valued by parents and the wider community, and neighbourhoods are well maintained, safe, appealing, support healthy food choices and have a strong sense of community. So it's been really exciting to be part of that, and this is just the first phase of what I hope will be a series of projects looking at the evidence for and support for a wider vision for other groups than just primary school age children, and the importance in particular of planning and designing the environment to make a difference to health and well-being. I hope that by reporting these recent and exciting findings, we show how deeply rooted is our need for good quality landscapes around where we live and spend our days. And we can all be encouraged to get out more and have fun. One or two people in this audience who feature here. But I also hope that my research can help demonstrate convincingly how good landscape planning and design might make a difference. And I hope I have encouraged you all to get out more when you've finished. Thank you very much.
How long does this project go for? Is it 2000, the Woodlands one, 2011, 2014?
It goes to 20, our research, rather than the Wyatt project, our research started this year and goes to 2016. And we're looking at 3 communities with an intervention, 3 that haven't yet had one. Physical change, social change, before and after.
And I'm wondering, will there be a phase 4?
We're all wondering that.
Richard Coyne from Asala. All your pictures show rolling green grass with shrubs and vegetation, and their spring images. Landscapes and the outdoor environment is so diverse, isn't it, for all of us? You don't show any pictures of canals being under bridges, areas of some sort of contradiction with concrete and grass. I'm just wondering whether you've been selective in the kinds of images you've shown, or if these in fact are the kinds of environments that make us feel better.
I have been selective, and mostly when we ask people about environments that they like and visit, we take as a definition anything they tell us they like. And in some cases, teenagers, for example, often went to pretty scruffy places and might still be quite happy there. And sometimes a very simple space or a very unextensive space that may not be particularly green but has a few natural elements can be still really important for people. I suppose I've been selective in what I've shown to try and highlight the kind of places that automatically seem to resonate with people when you talk about the natural environment and feeling good about things. But yes, I could have chosen another whole series, and we could have been challenged as to just how much is enough. And that's one of the questions we're still interested in answering. You know, just how much nature is enough, how much green space, how much engagement with what kind of level of nature actually makes a difference.
This is Bill Cairns, Cairns Intersphere. I'm always very interested to listen to Catharine, because over the years she's always impressed me considerably because of her investigative capability. But what I'd like to ask you, Catharine, is how much interaction did you have, A, with the medical profession, and B, with the teaching professions in pursuit of your research?
Well, the early work with children in schools, obviously we had to engage with schools and the teachers, absolutely. And in some of the recent work, Good Places, Better Health, obviously teachers have been involved in that work with the Scottish Government. One of the things that's been really exciting about my research career over the last 10 years has been how much more I've engaged with people in public health and the medical side of things in my research. When we started developing open space in 2001, we wanted to get funding to do research on health in relation to landscape. We couldn't find anyone to fund us. Well, now it's the hot topic, not the only one, but I'm working with people in the medical school and the university, as well as public health researchers in other institutions.
Did you look at any other groups? So when you talk about young children, teenagers, and then over 65s, but how about people in wheelchairs or other learning difficulties? Do they form part of this analysis?
We've done research with people with disabilities, yes. We've done work with people with hearing difficulties, a range of different projects, looking at inclusive design across a number of different groups. I haven't reported all of that here, but yes, we have been and continue to be interested in all of those.
Alex Blotchwell, I work for Sustrans. I just wondered if you'd comment on the extent to which the green space affects people directly through using it, or whether it's just the existence, the aesthetic quality of the green space, and the calming effect that has. Is it the fact that it's there that causes extra activity that's the main factor? What's the balance of them?
Well, yeah, that's the crunch question, really. We're still analysing some of our questionnaire data from the same study that the cortisol work was done with, to try and find out exactly what is behind that, because we're still not quite sure whether it's just... We think it's probably not just looking at it. We think it's not just the view from your home, because we have asked about that. We think it's actually probably going into it or going past it. But it seems likely that it's not just to do with being physically active there, that it may be something more to do with mental health than physical, or a combination of the two.
My name's Anne Pattison. I really enjoyed your talk, but what I was wondering was if people commented on safety things and sight lines, and if you could be seen in places, and what makes places safer for people walking by themselves, and different ranges of people who mightn't go out of doors without feeling safe. That's a really important issue, and safety comes up time and again as something that is a concern, particularly for women. That won't surprise you to know. And when we're looking at woodlands, then intervisibility, being able to see far ahead, having clear views, not feeling too enclosed, can make a difference to people's sense of safety. Many women won't go into a woodland alone, particularly if it's an unfamiliar place. So there's familiarity there as well. And if you remember the research about children's experience influencing adult, that familiarity obviously partly comes from what you did as a child. So safety and feelings of safety are really important. What is much less clear is whether you can design something that will feel safe for everyone. Part of what makes people feel safe is who they're with, or whether they're on their own, their prior experience, a range of things. So we can do some things that will make most people feel comparatively safe most of the time. But there is so much subjective and personal experience bound up in that I think design alone doesn't resolve all of those issues. And it was very interesting that in the Sustrans DIY Streets project, people felt safer in the streets at night. And the automatic response to people feeling unsafe at night, the knee-jerk reaction you will get from people is, oh, more lighting. But actually the lighting wasn't changed at all. So it shows that it's a complex issue.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much. Just a quick word to say, to sort of express our appreciation for the lecture that you've given. It's been both informative, but also quite inspiring as well. And the way in which you bring in things from different disciplines, as well as rooting yourself within your core of landscape archaeology, is a sort of model, I think, for many people to pick up on and run with. And the success that you've had and have is awe-inspiring as well. So I think we all want to congratulate you and welcome you formally into your chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This production is brought to you by the University of Edinburgh.